Valentine's Table Runner is a free sewing pattern. I have a link in the description below to the blog post where everything that you need to know is listed there for you. Sometimes it's a little bit easier when you're working through a project to check out the blog post. But what I want to tell you is that this pattern has a beginner version and an intermediate version. So if you feel like the X's and the O's might be a bit much, don't worry, later on in the process, I will talk you through how we omit that step, and you can just focus on learning how to do the hearts because they are so easy. I know that you can do it. So let's jump into this tutorial, figure out everything that we need, and go through all of the steps along the way. Please hit that subscribe button because I post new beginner sewing tutorials every Friday. So let's get into it. You might think that we are starting at step 1, but I actually want to start talking to you about step 3 first. And that is because when you are making this table runner, you have long strips that you will put on both sides of your table runner. I would actually like you to cut out your strips, your borders, before you cut out your actual squares. That way you can make sure that you have a long enough strip of fabric to do both the top and the bottom sides. So that particular strip of fabric, you will cut at 50.5 inches by 2.5 inches. Cut 2 more strips at 12.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And that will just be for this top end here on both ends. Another thing to note is that I use a 1/4 inch seam allowance throughout the entire tutorial. If you don't have a 1/4 inch seam allowance sewing foot, definitely check the link in the description down below because I will link to a few there for you, and it is so much easier to sew projects like this using a specific 1/4 inch seam allowance sewing foot. So that goes into how much fabric you need to buy. What I did was I bought a half a yard of 2 different white print fabrics. So I've got a cute little X and O pattern here, and I've got the hearts here. I highly recommend that you purchase fabric that is non-directional fabric. I bought a half a yard fabric of each of these different whites, and then I bought 1.5 yards of the pink fabric. So that's a quick overview of step 3. Now let's start with step 1. All right, so step 1, we are going to focus on making our hearts. We will need 1 for either end. For myself, I made each heart out of a different print. So I'm gonna walk you through how many squares you need for each white heart. You will need to cut out 6 white and 2 pink squares of fabric at 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. And then you will also need 8 half square triangles. So to do that, you will need to cut out 4 white and 4 pink 4-inch by 4-inch squares, and those squares will be the squares that you actually turn into your half square triangle. So that's everything you need to make 1 heart block. However, I am going to ask you to go to the description down below, and there you will find a link to my full tutorial on how to put that heart block together. And now on to step 2. Step 2 is that middle section. So as you can see behind me here, I have 4 X's and 4 O's. However, for the beginner version, what you're going to do is you are just going to cut out 1 large chunk of fabric and you will place that in between your 2 heart blocks. You will cut that large chunk of fabric out at 24.5 inches by 12.5 inches. And that will fit beautifully in between those 2 hearts. However, if you want to make yourself a shorter table runner, then you can always make that section smaller and it will just create a shorter table runner. But if you're choosing to go the intermediate route, then you need to make 4 X's and 4 O's. To do that, you will need to cut out 16 white squares, 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches for all of your X's, and then 16 more white squares of the opposite print, at least that's what I did for myself, also at 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So you will end up with 32 squares in total to make up all of these X's and O's. And then we need to cut out 64 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch squares. Of course, cutting out all of these squares is very easy because you will just cut out strips of fabric and then start slicing that way. So it shouldn't take as much time as the number makes it sound. And I also have a tutorial that walks you through all of the steps on how to make X's and O's. So in the end, the heart block is going to end up being 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. The X and the O blocks are going to end up being 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. Once you have all of your X's and your O's, then lay them out appropriately and sew them all together. Then we are back at step 3, and step 3 is adding our strips of fabric. So we've already cut out those strips, but now what you'll do is you will add your short strips to either end of the hearts, and then you will add your long strips to the opposite sides. And now our Valentine's table runner top is complete, but we're not quite done. I have a beginner's version and an intermediate version on how you can finish sewing your table runner. I will link to both those tutorials down below as well. If you want to learn how to add homemade binding and to actually quilt your table runner, I actually do a no math method. So it's pretty cool, it's really easy, and it's a great way to learn a new skill. I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please hit that thumbs up, share this tutorial with other people, and happy Valentine's Day. Bye for now. I'm using my hands a lot in this tutorial. I hope it's not distracting. My apologies if it is.